Most people think history is about the past. Dates, events, names, things that happened before you were born, settled, filed, explained, and now exist mostly in textbooks nobody reads twice. But here's another way to think about it. What if history isn't about what happened, but about how you see what's happening right now? What if the real value of knowing the past isn't the information but a kind of vision? The ability to look at the present and recognize patterns that most people around you can't see because they don't know what to compare it to. You are living inside history right now, not the past version, the current one, the version that people in the future will look back at and see patterns in, that you might not be able to see clearly from inside it, unless you've trained yourself to look for them. Tonight, that's what we're doing. Not learning facts, developing a way of seeing. When history is taught as information, it produces people who know things. Dates, battles, treaties, movements, a collection of facts that can be recalled on request. But when history is understood as pattern, it produces something different, people who see differently, who look at a current event and recognize its shape from somewhere else, who look at a new technology and understand intuitively how societies have absorbed new technologies before, what they disrupt, what they preserve, what unintended consequences tend to follow. This is a different relationship with the past. Not ownership of facts, fluency in patterns. Human behavior across radically different contexts and centuries tends to produce similar structures, similar tensions, similar resolutions. Not because history repeats, but because human nature remains consistent enough to generate recognizable patterns through very different circumstances. Tonight, 5 patterns, not to give you more information, to give you a different pair of eyes. In ancient Greece, a philosopher named Polybius watched city-states being absorbed into larger empires. The intimate politics of the small city, where citizens knew each other, argued in public squares, held real accountability over their leaders, was giving way to something bigger, more anonymous, more distant, the individual's sense of influence over their own governance slowly disappearing, as the scale of power expanded beyond what any single person could meaningfully participate in. And Polybius developed a theory that all governments move through a predictable cycle. Monarchy becomes tyranny. Tyranny is overthrown by aristocracy. Aristocracy degenerates into oligarchy. Oligarchy gives way to democracy. Democracy collapses into chaos. And from the chaos, a strong leader emerges, monarchy again. He called this the anacyclosis, the rotation of constitutions, and he believed it was not a theory, but an observation, a pattern he had seen, not just predicted. Now sit with that for a moment, not to draw a direct line from ancient Greece to the present. The contexts are too different for simple comparison, but to notice the shape, the recurring tendency of systems to contain the seeds of their own transformation, the way the solution to one problem generates the conditions for the next one. This pattern appears not just in politics, in economics, in culture, in technology. The printing press disrupted the church's control over information. Printed pamphlets enabled the Reformation, a genuine decentralization of authority. And then printed media became its own centralized authority. Newspapers, publishers, broadcasting, a new set of gatekeepers, until the next disruption came. The pattern doesn't repeat in content. It repeats in structure, centralization, disruption, decentralization, new centralization, over and over in different clothes, with different names, in contexts that look nothing like each other on the surface, but that share the same underlying shape. Once you see that shape, you start to see it everywhere, not with false certainty, but with a particular kind of informed expectation. And that expectation, in the right moment, is a form of advantage. The ideas you take for granted, the concepts that feel like common sense, like simply the way things are the ideas that survived, that were selected for transmission, that fit well enough within existing power structures to be carried forward into the next era. From ancient Mesopotamia, we have thousands of years of written records, because clay tablets survive conditions that destroy papyrus and parchment. From other civilizations of the same period, where the medium was less permanent, we have almost nothing. their science, their philosophy, their way of understanding the world. Gone, existing only in secondhand references, filtered through other cultures, often misrepresented. The history of ideas we have is not the history of ideas that existed. It is the history of ideas that survived the conditions of their recording. And survival was not random. It was shaped by power, by what the people who controlled resources decided was worth preserving, worth housing, worth translating, worth carrying forward. The medieval church preserved enormous amounts of classical knowledge while also determining what was heretical. The knowledge that reached the Renaissance had passed through that filter and arrived changed. Here's the quiet implication. You are not thinking freely from first principles. You are thinking with the conceptual tools that were preserved for you. And what you are unable to think may simply be what wasn't passed on. Recognizing that is the first step towards seeing beyond it. In 1859, a Swiss businessman named Henry Dunant traveled to northern Italy. On a commercial errand, he arrived in the town of Solferino on the evening of June 24th, the same day as one of the bloodiest battles of the 19th century. He had not planned to be there. He was not a soldier, not a doctor, not a diplomat. He was a businessman. On a commercial errand, what he witnessed changed him. Tens of thousands of wounded soldiers left on the battlefield without adequate medical care. He organized local civilians to help. He went home. He wrote a book about what he had seen, published in 1862, distributed across Europe. Within 2 years, the Geneva Convention was established. The International Committee of the Red Cross was founded, a framework for the treatment of the wounded in warfare. That shaped military conflict and humanitarian law for the next century and a half. Dunant was not supposed to be there. The battle was an accident of timing. His presence was contingent on a commercial decision. And what followed was one of the most significant humanitarian developments in modern history. The history you were taught tends to emphasize intention, plans, strategies, decisions made by people who understood their historical significance. But most significant developments in history were not recognized as significant at the time. They were ordinary moments that became extraordinary through their consequences. This changes how you think about the present, because the moments that will look significant to people looking back are probably not the ones that feel significant right now. The small, unremarkable moment happening somewhere today that nobody is paying attention to may be the one that changes everything. History seen this way is not a story of planned progress. It is an improvisation, a continuous unscripted movement where the most important notes are often played by people who didn't know they were playing. There is a bias so common, it barely registers as a bias. The assumption that your present moment represents some kind of peak, not necessarily in terms of happiness or virtue, but in terms of understanding. The quiet background assumption that you see things more clearly than people before you because you have the benefit of their mistakes, because you are in some sense the current version. The most recent, and more recent feels like more correct. This assumption is understandable. It is also almost certainly wrong, in the same way that every previous generation made it and was wrong. Consider how confident educated people in the 19th century were in their understanding of human psychology. Serious, intelligent people developed theories that seemed rigorous and well-evidenced, that explained human behavior in ways that satisfied the intellectual standards of their time. Many of those theories are now understood to have been profoundly limited, some harmful in their applications, reflecting the unexamined assumptions of their context. Not because the people were foolish, because every framework reflects the moment that produced it, including the frameworks that feel most certain. The philosopher Thomas Kuhn described this in 1962. Science doesn't progress by simple accumulation, adding new facts to an existing structure. It progresses through revolutions, moments when the existing framework, the dominant way of understanding a field, becomes unable to accommodate what it's seeing and is replaced by something new. He called it a paradigm shift. Every era has a paradigm, a set of assumptions so fundamental, so deeply embedded, that they don't feel like assumptions, they feel like reality. The assumptions of your moment, The things you believe so deeply you've never examined them will look to people a century from now the way the assumptions of the 19th century look to you, partially right, partially the product of an incomplete framework, reflecting things about your time that you cannot fully see from inside it. This is not a reason for cynicism. It is a reason for holding your certainties with slightly more openness, slightly more awareness that the map is not the territory, that being very confident and being right are not the same thing and never have been. You came in tonight knowing things about history, events, names, periods, the kind most people have, but something has shifted, not in what you know and how you're holding it. You're leaving with something harder to name than information, a way of seeing, the recognition that patterns repeat, not in their surface forms, but in their underlying structures, that what disappears shapes us as much as what survives, that history moves through small, contingent, unpredicted moments, as much as through grand decisions and deliberate plans, and that your framework, however solid it feels, is one position in an ongoing process, not the end of it. You are still inside history. That hasn't changed. You cannot step outside it to see it whole. Nobody can. But you can look for the patterns. You can hold your certainties with slightly more awareness. Ask slightly better questions of the present. Recognize slightly more of what would otherwise remain invisible. That is not a small thing. In a world that moves quickly and rewards certainty, the ability to see patterns, to hold complexity, to resist the assumption that now is the peak, is rarer than it looks. You see a little more clearly than you did 15 minutes ago. Not everything, just more. And more is where it starts.